This week, Michael and I battled opponents in a martial arts tournament. But man, those 8-year-olds were tougher than we expected. So while we nursed our wounds, we watched Enter the Dragon.
Welcome back to How Did You Miss This? A podcast where we watch classic movies that some of us missed the first time around. I'm Evan Toller-Hickey, and with me as always, Michael Hansen and Chris Deschain. And this week, I have forced my friends to watch a movie that I absolutely love, 1973's Enter the Dragon, starring Bruce Lee. This is one of the most important kung fu films ever made, which begs the question, Chris, how did you miss this?
I am not the biggest lover of kung fu movies. I have heard so much about this movie and that how vaunted it is that I think I just figured that it would not live up to the hype that had been built up for it, and just not being a lover in general, I'm like, I can live without it, I think. So it was an interesting watch for me. I think it's I've got a lot of thoughts. Michael, how about you? How did you miss this?
Well, it's an interesting one because I missed this entirely age-wise. So I was not young enough to watch it. It came out the year after I was born. Later, it wasn't available for me to be able to rent on, VHS. And then much later after that, I think I missed the train completely because then it was just like old and outdated. But I really do look forward to talking about this because seeing it now, there's so many influences in video games and other movies and music that I think it's just been really, really cool to watch. So I don't know how I missed it really, but I'm glad we watched it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good point to maybe talk a little bit about how this movie got made before we talk about what we thought about it. So, Evan, do you want to run us down how this thing came together?
Sure. This is coming at a really, really interesting time in cinema, both in America and in Hong Kong. The Shaw Brothers was a studio in Hong Kong that had been dominating Hong Kong cinemascape at that time. And they were the main studio pumping out tons of films and where a lot of classic kung fu films come out of. This new kind of upstart studio starts called Golden Harvest. And their major star, a man named Bruce Lee, Golden Harvest puts him in some films and he is phenomenal. And just really starts taking that studio and elevating it. The really cool thing about Enter the Dragon is that this is the first American and sort of Hong Kong joint kung fu film to come out. First production between a Western studio, Warner Brothers, and Asian filmmakers. So it's shot in Hong Kong and then actually gets release in the United States under the Warner Brothers banner. So this is like kind of a big deal because not only is an American studio taking that chance and putting its name behind a martial arts film, and this was before martial arts films had any real resonance in mainstream American popular culture. But also, let's not, play any of this down, is that like this is platforming like an actual diverse cast with an Asian American man at the center of it. This is a really big deal in filmmaking, and from it, Bruce Lee becomes a massive star, even though he dies just days before the release of this movie in the States at the age of 32, and kicks off a huge wave that resonates today. We don't get John Wick 4 without Enter the Dragon.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things. Like to your point, Evan, it's the production and casting of this movie is very clearly intent on seeing this film not just as a Hong Kong action movie, but as a global phenomenon. They have Bruce Lee, who's this growing star, like you're saying, but then they cast John Saxon and Jim Kelly. You got a little bit for everybody. It was filmed with people speaking in English. The trend there was always to overdub your movie regardless, but the actors performed in English. And then like it was this intent of like, we know this is going to be bigger than just Hong Kong, and we've got Warner Brothers signed on, and this is going to be the next big thing. Like this is on its way to making it a big global phenom. And to your point, I think the thing that adds even more fuel to the fire of this is, you know, the untimely death of Bruce Lee right before this movie comes out. Like it's just that extra little bit that I think just makes it that much more of a sensation when it came out. The amazing thing too is, to your point, like this is a big deal. This is like an international sensation. When it came out, it was well received globally. It was one of the top movies of the year in basically every market around the world. It made over $100 million on its initial release, but it was re-released a number of times over the years. So it made over $400 million, which when you adjust it for inflation is worth about $2 billion today, which is a whole boatload of money, especially when you factor in that they made this on a budget of under $1 million. So like 400 to 1 return is one of the highest returns, like investment to payout ratios of movies of all times. Highest grossing martial arts movie of all time, and of course, kind of as you were saying there, I mean, it's one of those like all time well regarded classic kung fu films, and it's got an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes today, and obviously just a hugely enduring cultural impact, both from the film itself, references to it, and even some of the music. So I'd be curious to know, now that you've seen it, Michael, like what were your thoughts on seeing Enter the Dragon for the first time?
I was kind of set on not liking it, I have to be honest. I thought it's really cheaply made. It's like you said about the audio. Again, kind of commented a little bit about Foley before, adding the sound effects, the voice syncing, who they picked to do certain things. Like there are a lot of things about this to not like, but then as I watched it, I thought there was more and more about it that felt really genuine in terms of some of the messaging and what he wanted to get across with it. You already touched on the multicultural aspect. Some characters are extremely two-dimensional, maybe even one-dimensional, but other ones have much more depth to them. And there's a story and a core that drives it that I think is very interesting. So I ended up liking it more and more and more as I went. For so many reasons, and so yeah, like I'm gonna walk away with this with a pretty good feel. I would not have picked this on my own, and I was, to be honest, a little bit set against it in the beginning, but yeah, I'm glad I watched it.
Now, Chris, you're actually a practitioner of martial arts. What do you think about having seen this movie now, as a not fan of the cinema genre?
So I think I like this movie more for what it did than for what it is. Like to the point you made, like it's the first time you have an Asian being cast as the leading role. It's bringing a style of film that hasn't been well regarded or regarded at all, I guess, in a lot of cases, to the forefront. It is definitely the foot in the door for a lot of stuff that I think was great. To Michael's point, there's a lot of stuff that is maybe not my favorite about it, including a lot of the fight scenes. Because I think there's just, I don't know, an invincible Bruce Lee, he barely gets touched in the entire movie, knocks everybody out in one punch, all that kind of stuff. So it's not my favorite from a martial arts movie perspective, but I appreciate so much what this movie did, even though I don't love the movie itself. It's okay.
Fair enough.
But I'm not.
I agree that this is very much an imperfect film, and I love it for it.
The more imperfect, the more Evan loves it.
I feel like we're finding a trend here.
And maybe that's a good point to take a quick break. And on the other side, when we come back, we'll talk about some of those imperfections. Hey, you're back and welcome back. So we're going to get into all the ins and outs of this movie. So if you don't want spoilers, then, those are coming. So for those of you who want a recap of what this movie is all about, this movie follows a martial artist appropriately named Lee. He's recruited by the British intelligence to infiltrate a martial arts tournament run by the crime lord Han. So Lee travels to Han's private island where he faces off against opponents in this tournament, and under the cover of night, secretly delves into the operations of Han's illegal empire. He finds out all about all these illegal activities and is eventually caught and forced to face off against the toughest opponents of all. So this is a movie that for me is first and foremost about one person, and that person is Bruce Lee. So maybe
heck yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Michael, maybe to you, since this is kind of your first time on the ride here, what did you think of Bruce Lee in this movie?
It's a little bit tricky because I know a few things about what he was trying to do with the cinema in the first place. I understand that he's very genuine about wanting to spread the whole art of Kung Fu, not just the physical side of it, but also some of the teachings. And I think that the whole thing around doing that in the movies as a way to spread it, I think he was very genuine about it. And I think that comes through in this. I think that there are a lot of parts of this movie where they add in these teachings and comments and thoughts to say it's more than just, who can punch the hardest. So I like that aspect of him. He's not a great actor. In some ways, because I don't think that the voice always works. And certainly the voice effects make it really silly. But I think that he's crazy compelling. And that I don't think that, I mean, look, I don't think we've seen a physique like this in the 50 years since. Like there's just something really, really outlandish about him. It's unbelievable. The shape he's in for this movie.
The fact that he can puff up to twice his size when he flexes blows my mind every time.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff too in the martial arts world too about how Bruce Lee has a less than ideal physique because he got bigger in muscles you shouldn't get bigger in so that he'd look better on film too. There's certain muscles that are good for punching and other ones that are good for posing. And he had to get some of those posing muscles a little bigger for some of the films. But I will say that he is, for me, definitely very magnetic, and just watching him on film, I can see why he was this up and coming movie star. And especially, for somebody who's just in his 30s, just really at the beginnings of things, it really raises the question of how much more could there have been? Because he's, I will say, the best part of this movie for me. There's lots of other stuff that I don't love, but watching Bruce Lee, he's pretty compelling. He's pretty engaging. He's obviously really good at all the stuff he's doing here too. So it's really great to watch. And to Michael's point, I think he does that balancing act about promoting the martial art while still, making it interesting, making it exciting, making it, something that other people can kind of watch without it just being a total oh, what's the technique? What's he doing? How's he doing? It's I don't know. He kicked the guy in the head. It was awesome.
One of my favorite things watching Bruce Lee in this movie is not when he's fighting. It's when he's sneaking around, because the cat-like grace that this man possesses blows my mind every time I watch the film. He seems to be able to walk without making a sound. And I know it's because he wasn't mic'd, but he really just every time he makes a jump or a roll to avoid being detected, it's just, watching him is like watching an Olympic gymnast or a ballet dancer.
And this is what I meant around there's so many ups and downs with this, because you say that, But then there are also those scenes start to get into like Austin Powers territory. Because why is he sneaking after these people? He could have just waited 30 more seconds and the guards would be gone. But he sneaks after them and it's so over the top. He does it incredibly well, but it's like the movie then gets into, what are you actually trying to do? So like there's this weird mix between amazing performance, incredible kind of like physical presence, but some strange directing choices, I think, throughout.
Well, I think it's a little bit of one of those interesting things about this movie because it's, part martial arts movie, part spy movie, part exploitation movie.
Part exploitation movie?
Yeah, well, okay.
This is all exploitation movie.
Yeah, it's 3 movies jammed into one, all for the price of whatever it cost in 1973. But I mean, I think to your point, Evan, my favorite parts of this movie are actually where it's like, oh, let's make a James Bond movie and have him sneaking around in an underground lair, which that's partly why I found it a little like, oh, we're going back to the tournament again. Oh, darn. I don't want to watch another one of these fights where somebody gets their head stomped on. I'd rather have a little more intrigue or whatever, because I found, like you're saying, like that's probably the best part of this movie is where he's, spying around, creeping around, finding out what's going on, as opposed to like another fight scene. I feel like there maybe could have been a little bit less about that.
I think one of the other things that we shouldn't downplay in this film, that has some incredible physical action and stunts, is the charm of John Saxon and Jim Kelly together as well. I think as a trio, Lee, Roper, and Williams are a really compelling group of dudes to follow, and really gives you that kind of. It gives this film a cool that so many other films lack. Like, this is a cool film.
Oh, when Williams arrives in Hong Kong, that is one of the coolest sequences. Music, him walking around, it just like it sets a tone that is very hard to beat. And I think that they do that extremely well. Then, of course, they do some flashbacks don't work quite as well. Some changes, like some of the scenes on the island don't work quite as well, but it's definitely a cool movie, no doubt about it.
I will say that for me, there's parts that are where I appreciate those actors more, and parts where it was the part where we're like, this is where we say something cool now. And they say something. I'm like, oh, no, that wasn't it. That's not what you were hoping for, I don't think. I think for me, John Saxon was probably a little bit more successful in his role than Jim Kelly was for me. I found Roper was a little bit more compelling. I also was reading up a little that to get him into the film, they had to rewrite parts of it because he was like, no, my character isn't going to die. You can kill the other guy, not me. So there was some tweaks and changes that actually happened to those characters. But I found I liked him a little bit better. I found Williams had the lines that made me laugh more, though. Not necessarily because I was supposed to laugh, I don't think, but I did find that the part I found a little bit weird was the 3 of them headlined, but like Bruce Lee never really hangs out with Williams. Like, they don't really ever have time together. Like, okay.
He doesn't really hang out with Roper either, but they do a really great job of a quick solidification of the relationship between those 2 characters, and they hop on the junk, and they're like, "Whoa, what have you been up to since Nam?" And it's like, and since we've seen Platoon, we know that boy, that's really going to either bring them together or tear them apart. And they seem genuinely happy to see each other.
But that's the thing that they do really well in this. They tackle some pretty big topics. 'Cause like you say, here you have like these 2 people who clearly have like this kinship, and there's nothing to it. You have a scene where there's a white guy on the junk who is acting it was completely ridiculous. It made no sense why he's attacking this Chinese Hong Kong servant person. But then what happens to him is terrific. Like, it just sets the tone. Like, okay, well, these are the values. This is what Bruce Lee is willing to like do and stand up for. Like, I thought that was a brilliant scene. It's like a big commentary on race, but with a little bit of humor in there. And I thought, like, wow, 50 years ago, good for you.
The art of fighting without fighting.
I found I was wishing a little bit that this was a little bit more. This is going to sound like a funny thing, but a little more Bruce Lee centric, in that the other characters played a little less of a role. Kind of getting back to that, like, I found the tournament to be too much of a thing, and these guys each having big roles and big fights and whatever in the tournament, and having their own side stories, to be a little distracting. I wish there was a little less of that. I thought they were fine. They just weren't my favorite part. But maybe speaking of the tournament, really the 9/10 of this movie and what it's really about. Like, this movie's about fight scenes, and like, tell me about the fight scenes. What did you think of them?
It's hard to look at these fight scenes now because they've evolved so far. It's like looking at the original Star Wars movie and see how they do the lightsabers compared to what they've done with the most recent ones. Like, it's a galaxy far, far away, right? Like, that separates the two worlds. And I think it's the same here. I could not get over the sounds and some of the things that they do, but at the same time, I kind of have to chuckle because, I got the first PlayStation when it came out. I've been playing the different fighting games, Tekken games ever since, and I see all of these influences throughout. So I can kind of go, oh yeah, that thing. Like, it's incredible. So it's hard for me to look at it just on its own merit through the lens of, everything has evolved in the past 50 years, and also seeing the influences and everything that's come from it. That said, when I look at them, I go, they really suffer from this old, what the old Western movies used to do, which is, I'm going to punch you, and then I'm going to wait, and then you're going to get a turn and punch me, and then we're going to do these things. Yeah. And it's so unconvincing.
Everybody one at a time. Please line up for your turn to try to hit me. Yeah.
But I have to remind myself that this is like a 50-year-old movie, and that says something on its own.
I think for me, some of the challenges I had around the fight scenes were, there was a lot of them. Number one, there was a lot. And there was a lot of, especially for Bruce Lee's fight scenes, the invincible hero where he can't really be injured, knocks everybody out in one hit. To your point, Michael, too, it's like everybody politely lines up to take their turn, getting punched in the face by him and being knocked out immediately. So for me, there was a little bit of that. Like, that made the stakes, I felt, in all of the fight scenes not feel very high, because you watch him knock out the first 400 guys in one hit, and you're like, well, probably the next 400 are going to go down in one shot as well. Yeah. So I found even the climactic fight scene with Han, I feel like the air had been taken out of it, because he couldn't be wounded or touched really. So yeah. That's maybe one of the flaws for me.
I'll say it a little bit differently. I actually thought that it makes sense. It's a little bit like in a video game. You want the final boss fight there for him to be injured. It makes sense. It's going to say, oh yeah, of course, because Han is like the ultimate one. The one that didn't make sense to me was O'Hara. The one that didn't make sense for him is I expected him to put up more of a fight. Like, that buildup had been longer coming, and it was just like, I don't even know what's going on, or it seems too simple. Yeah. That was a disappointment to me, but it actually made sense that everyone else were just basic, cannon fodder, because it's the main guy at the end. That's what you're building up towards, and that's where he gets injured for the first time.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, Michael, in terms of the O'Hara stuff, that it could have been fully excised from the movie, and nothing would be lost, including Lee's need to fight Han, because he is an ex-Shaolin monk from the monastery that Lee is from, and has sullied that monastery's name. So he's already got the reason to go for honor. The fact that O'Hara has killed his sister as well, and then is very, very quickly dispatched with. completely unneeded in this film. All of that said, I have to sort of put myself back into like, what would an audience watching this in 1973 in the States be feeling, be wanting to see, be excited for? And having not seen all the things that had been coming out of China from Shaw Brothers or the earlier Golden Harvest films, being like really blown away with just, the kick into O'Hara's chest that sends him, flying backwards, or, even watching Bruce Lee jump up in the air and come down on O'Hara's head, and you not seeing it, but his face contorted in all of the pain that he's sort of getting out there, and also how hard it is for him to take a life at that point. And that seeing that up on a big screen, 1973, in the summer heat, you're escaping that and you're seeing this really kind of wild thing that you haven't seen before. I think that like all the fight scenes that we find really slow right now, that audience would be like, oh my God.
I think it's an interesting thing because one of the things is Robert Klaus, who directed this, wound up getting this job partly because Bruce Lee had seen some of his direction in other films. And those other fight scenes that he directed were real, like knock down, drag out. The two guys like just beat the hell out of each other and trash an entire room as they brawl back and forth, and both of them come out of it just like an absolute mess. So I mean, I can totally hear the like, what are you expecting out of, especially somebody who's supposed to be this like super duper martial artist. I just think it's an interesting thing for this director to come in and a lot of these fight scenes were choreographed by Bruce Lee himself. And I'm wondering if something is lost by making this, what's the right way to put it? By making him invincible rather than able to surmount the challenges that are laid out in front of him. Because I think the O'Hara thing, who killed his sister, although really the sister killed herself, but that's a whole other thing. Like that would have been a more interesting plot line if he was actually a difficult boss. Like he was like a tutorial boss, like you're learning how to play the game and it's like, all right, press A, then press B. Oh, you beat him. Congratulations. That was easy. Now we'll get to the real game. Like that's what I kind of wish I'd seen a little bit, at least at points. And I do feel like there's definitely a lot of yes-anding when they were writing this. Like, yeah, and let's tell him before he goes to the island that his sister also got killed by one of these guys. Yeah, and also let's make the guy be producing heroin onto the island. Yeah, and let's make it in international waters so that they can't show up and just raid it with the army. Yeah, so there's a lot of those. Like, I'm like, okay, there's maybe a little much. Maybe we could have pared this down. But if you did trim it down, it probably would have been like a 60-minute movie. So I get there's some stuff there, but I think that's kind of the fascinating part, because I do still think that when you see Bruce Lee doing martial arts, there's just like F yeah, this is a dude who does it. Even if you see him do the head stomp, I think it was 3 times in the movie. Or maybe he did it twice and then Bolo Young did it once. And you're like, okay, I've seen the same move. Maybe we could do something else. Maybe there's some variety here. I will say some of the fight scenes, my favorite fight scene in the movie is the one where Bolo Young seems to kill one of the guards who was getting punished.
Him like a baby?
Basically rocking him like a baby. Even it didn't look that uncomfortable. And then the guy's just squashed and dead. So that's one of the questions I have for each of you is, do you have a favorite fight scene from this film?
I have a favorite kick that I watch over and over and over again. And it's right before Han runs into the mirror room, where Bruce Lee kicks an obvious dummy of
in the air
of Han. But Bruce Lee goes from standing still to having done a roundhouse kick in like 3 frames. It's the speed and force at which he kicks that dummy is so exciting to watch. Also, when he has the nunchucks is great.
For me, I think, and this was so weird. In a way, I hated the mirror scene so much because you picture it and you go, just because someone might look like, I don't know where you are, you can still hear them, right? So if someone hits you, they can't just disappear the next second just because they're out of sight in the mirror. But at the same time, I really, really enjoyed that scene. I thought it was very clever. It was really interesting. It was a great way to kind of like play at the end with, okay, so now you have to have your other senses really kick into gear because I can't just defeat everyone, until he did this thing around the illusion, remove the illusion of the enemy, and then you can kind of find them and he destroys every mirror. So for me, like that was actually my favorite fight sequence, even though it also was incredibly annoying in many ways.
I think, I mean, to what we've kind of talked about, there's that paying or seeing this movie play out in popular culture now, because I mean, how many other movies have you seen have these battles in, mirrored rooms? John Wick did that in John Wick 2, John Wick 3, I want to say,
I think.
Yeah, John Wick 2, because that's right. Where there's the whole battle scene as they go through the mirrored space and, where is he really? I think, again, some of the stakes came out of that fight for me just because Han stabs him in the back with giant razor blade Wolverine claws, and it, scratches him. Okay, cool. For me, I will say my favorite fight is just when he is in the underground, drug den lair, and he's just going through a bunch of guys. He breaks out sticks. He gets the nunchucks and that whole sequence of stuff as he goes through.
Where he kills Jackie Chan.
Multiple times in there too, because that was actually going to be one of the things I was going to ask you is, how many times did each of you see Jackie Chan in this movie?
Like twice, I think. I know that Bruce Lee accidentally punched him in the face, like straight up, like clocked him. And and one of Jackie Chan's favorite memories is Bruce Lee being like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Are you okay?" And holding him.
I have to say, I did not recognize him in any of them. I read the same thing about where he is and what happened, but I did not recognize him. And then later I was like, oh yeah, but I did not pick it up at all when I watched it.
Yeah. This is a film that has a number of martial artists who go on to have great careers, either globally, like Jackie Chan, or a number who star in a whole boatload of successful martial arts movies. Because you have Bolo Yeung, Sammo Hung, like a bunch of folks who are great. Like I remember seeing Bloodsport with Bolo Yeung in it. He's such an iconic character in that movie that it's really cool to be able to connect the dots back in this kind of lineage of great martial arts actors and movies that kind of led up to that point. So it's pretty cool to see those folks coming out of this. I think one of the things that I would love to talk about is just the story. I mean, we've already kind of touched on it. I think the story makes just enough sense to get you from A to Z. Okay, to Evan's point, he's a bad guy. He was part of our order. Go fix it. There's some plot holes that you could, get Bruce Lee to drop kick somebody through, but that's okay. I think one of the biggest questions for me, though, about this story is, do the elements, which, there's a lot of exploitation in this movie, do those parts of it still hold up? I know it's par for the time, but is this still a 2023 kind of thing that you're like, yeah, I could recommend this to my, Gen Z nephew or something and be okay?
I think that you have to put a number of disclaimers in front of it. I mean, again, we talked about how one of the really cool things about this movie is that it does platform at its center an Asian American man. And, you also have, Jim Kelly there, who will go on to be Black Belt Jones, really in his first role. I think he was a late replacement for the part of Williams. That said, I feel like of all of the three characters, like Williams feels like he's kind of done the dirtiest of them all. He's already made the decision to get into the tournament when he gets into the fight with the racist white cops. So it's not like he's like running from the law. It's great to see him beat up racist cops. But his sort of backstory was kind of the one that had the least amount of like, this is the reason why you are going to the island. And then he sort of gets short shrift, by being murdered. Framed. And Han doesn't seem to feel bad about that at all.
I think that's a good point. I was thinking about that earlier to say what I liked it was the setup. It's like there was an element of desperation. Everyone's there because it's their sort of like the final option. But you're right. Like they didn't really set it up with Williams the same way they could have. And they did not. But they also show this incredible character with him of not giving up Lee when he had a chance. So he's just like sticks with his beliefs and goes with that. So I thought that was very good. But your question around like, would you recommend this? I think my caution of recommending would be more around just the merits of it being a good movie, bad movie, more so than the other things. I thought about this a fair amount with, this exploitation of the women. They bring them in and it's like, oh, here, have your pick. But then I stopped myself and I thought, well, how many movies do we still see that have the exact same thing when you have a drug lord, someone of importance, and say, oh, here, make good use of everything in my house, in my bar, in my whatever, like including the women. Like that's a theme that keeps going on. So, I kind of had to catch myself and go like, yeah, that's really 70s, but it's also today. So I think more so being clear around those things, and then maybe like we have a bit of a theme on this podcast. Like these are pretty dude-centric movies. So maybe more from that perspective. But, I think with the right qualifier, this would be an easy one to recommend.
I found it just interesting from that perspective because you have that stretch with Lee's sister where you're getting that flashback about, how O'Hara and his gang killed her. I'm like, I don't know. She seemed like she could have taken 99% of the people in the tournament. It would have been great to have seen her or the other secret agent whose name I'm blanking on who was on the island, or just like, okay, there was space for it. I mean, I get it. It's 1973 and it's the first, action movie that's making in North America from, Hong Kong. Cool. But I definitely felt like I was like, oh, I'm a little, I don't know. I don't know how well it holds up, but I will say Williams definitely has some of my favorite lines from the movie, even if his story feels a little bit like, thrown in or cut a little short in places. I will say that his line around like, man, you're straight out of a comic book, like did make me almost fall off the couch laughing about it. There is some dialogue in this movie that is just like right over the top, like Bruce Lee going over a wall over the top. Are there any lines that stand out for each of you in this movie that just like you can't stop saying to your kids around the house?
Heck yeah. When O'Hara punches the board in half and Bruce Lee's just like, boards don't hit back, or what? Yeah. Like, great. Love it.
I actually like the more philosophical thing. I really liked the little teaching that Lee did with his young pupil when he was talking about like, if you point at the moon, like don't focus on the finger or you're going to miss the majesty of the moon itself. Yeah. Like it's those types of lines I actually thought worked. It was nice that they built that in. They didn't have to. But I think back to my earlier point, like where I think he was genuine about wanting to get some of these principles and ideas across. And I think it worked well.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to take another quick break. And on the other side, we can talk maybe a little bit about how this movie sounds. We'll be right back. And welcome back. So, one of the things that obviously stands out about this movie is the way it sounds. This is a movie that was dubbed with no surprise. That was the norm for Hong Kong movies. It was incredibly expensive to get the gear and equipment that you needed to record on set. It also took a lot more time. So basically every Kung Fu movie is filmed without sound and then dubbed in post-production. So it's definitely one of the things that stands out. How did both of you find the dubbing and just the sound effects and everything that goes on in post-production for Enter the Dragon?
I think that for me, it is again like a classic of the genre. The dubbing is bad, but works. I mean, works better than it does in a lot of the other dubbed films because the actors are speaking English, and it, for the most part, is the actors being voiced by the actors who play them. I think Han might be the notable exception, but everybody else, like that is Bruce Lee speaking his lines, and that's John Saxon, that's Jim Kelly. And I love the, those sounds, oh, whoop-ah! And the big, hits and crazy kind of like clack slaps that they use for the punches. It's fun. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure Michael hates it, but I will let him maybe surprise me.
I mostly hate it because I thought it was, even with all of those things, I think it's just sloppily done. There's so many mistimed things. I think that it's really not well done. And I think that part of the reason we love these things now, like what you say, the sound effects of the fighting, is because they become classic over time. But I think they're just ridiculous. The sounds of punching people, like they just make no sense whatsoever. And then I think also what you were saying around the actors, I really did like that. But why is that the one person, so his actual master has this really, really crazy American accent. Lee, you must go to this place and do that. Like it makes no sense. Like everyone else gets to have a different accent. But this one, who is supposed to be the most proto-Chinese Shaolin master, speaks with a very, very wise American accent. That just made zero sense to me. The other part of sound, though, like in this, it'd be very interesting to hear.
You know his story.
That's right. To hear what you both think is about the music. I already kind of played my hand a little bit earlier by talking about it, but I'd be really interested in the other side of the sound thing, which is the soundtrack.
Love it. I listen to the soundtrack a fair amount. You've both heard me say I think it puts the foo in funk. It's scored by Lalo Schifrin, who's most famously the composer of the Mission Impossible theme song. I really, really dig this insane soundtrack. It's so bad and so great, and it makes me really happy.
I will say, so, having grown up a very big fan of hip hop, that often my favorite part of many Kung Fu films has always been the soundtracks, because there's often some really catchy songs on there that wind up getting sampled by the Wu-Tang Clan or something. And then you're like, oh, that's where it came from. So for me, this is probably actually one of the parts that I enjoyed the most, is just the like, oh, cool. That's actually that's pretty catchy little thing. Hey, that's a good one. Hey, that's another good one. So there's definitely a lot of like very funky little like songs going on throughout this that I was like, all right, cool. I could get down with this. This is cool. So probably one of my, what's the right way to put it? most consistent things about this movie is the soundtrack. Like it's throughout, it's consistent. There's always kind of the right kind of tunes going on for the scene. Like I really like the scoring for this, and it was great. Like I no complaints. My no notes for the music. Otherwise, lots of complaints. But in this area, I'm like, good. It's great.
Couldn't agree with you more. Like I think that the music is such a good blend of it does the funk. It does. I didn't even realize what you mentioned around the Mission Impossible, but it makes so much sense, that spy influence, and then also building in something from the Far East. I think that this made me so happy to listen to. And like you say, it really helps to gel it all together from start to finish, because it's the one constant, like you say, and it's just it's I don't know what this would be like without it, but I was so pleased to listen to it.
Yeah, I think it really adds to the cool of the whole film.
Absolutely. So I have a few questions for each of you that maybe I'm hoping you can help me understand before we go. Why was there a basement full of prisoners?
I think that he was trying to test his drugs on the prisoners.
I thought he was testing the drugs on the women who he was turning into prostitutes and shipping off.
Maybe. I don't know.
Because at one point he's like, who are these guys? And he's like, oh, a bunch of,
people who've lost their will to live. Yeah.
Yeah. People who are lost their way and stuff. And I was like, okay. I mean, I think the honest answer would have been, these guys are here so that we can have a giant battle in a few hours. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Cool. Makes sense. I have no idea why those guys were there. And I'm like, there's so many of them.
And in the final battle, it's really convenient that they were all dressed in the same color so that you could tell, the good guys and the bad guys apart.
Yeah, exactly.
I also thought one of the weirdest lines in the entire movie was, "Help me, I am 17. I'm from California." Like,
yes, that was
so upsetting.
Weird. Yeah. It's like, okay, thank you. I guess that's fascinating. I'm going to carry on now and continue to fight these evil people, I guess, and I'll be back maybe.
Yeah, there's a few points. For me, that was one of those cringy points. Okay, so one of the questions for me too was, I think one of the interesting things they did in this movie was they did the POV Kung Fu cam, where you had a whole bunch of fight scenes viewed from, one of the fighters' perspectives, and you see the feet kind of coming out from the side of the camera and stuff. If you could do the POV Kung Fu cam for one thing that you do in your everyday life, what would you use your POV cam for?
Oh God, I wouldn't use the POV cam for anything.
I mean, like super stylized, action worthy.
No, I don't like the POV cam in this film.
Me neither.
I think it's perfectly cheesy and it works, but I hate it when they flip to the POV cam. What would I use the POV cam for in my normal life? I don't know. Cooking, probably.
With the sound effects.
Yeah.
I wrote down, I really think that the POV shots worked because they didn't overdo it. It was just like, whoa, look at that. That's actually really cool. I think I would use it in my day-to-day life for doing like goodbye kiss and hug in the morning to my family. You'd be like, what? And come close and...
Like that, it would say this, you'd hug your kids like Bolo Young, hug that guy to death.
That is my morning routine every day.
That you pick your 17-year-old son up like a baby and gradually try to crush him.
We have a complicated relationship.
Oh, okay.
How about you, Chris?
I mean, I was thinking like it would be amazing if you could flip into Kung Fu POV cam mode for like a boring part of your day where you're like, how could I make a Zoom meeting or, like that meeting that just won't end more entertaining by having it in like Kung Fu cam mode and like just have the like overdubbing and like just over the top action going on to just make this terribly dull thing like cheesy and entertaining in some way. But I don't know. Yeah, I think like you, Evan, I'm kind of like, it's cheesy and corny, but kind of delightful in a way. I didn't mind it, but yeah. So I'm curious for each of you, like this is a movie that has a huge cultural legacy that I, in some ways, I wonder whether it is bigger than the movie itself. Like, do you think that's the case? Do you think this is a well-earned thing? Do you think this is a film that has held up to where it stands in the cultural landscape now versus where it was then?
I think that there's a couple of things to tease out of that. And it is, whether or not the film holds up now versus the impact that the film has had. Because I think that in the case of this film, it has wildly outstripped itself in terms of its influence. It has such a massively outsized influence on the things that come after it. It is one of those things that fundamentally changed action movies. And that really can't be understated. But in the same way as like watching Metropolis or something like that, and then being like, I don't know, Metropolis wasn't as good as Aliens. It's really hard to compare things where it's like, this is what this genre, this is the wellspring of that.
Yep.
And so I think when we have to be mindful of that when we're talking about films that all of the other things sort of stand on the shoulders of. So I think that the cultural significance of this film eclipses the film itself. But I think the film itself is still really important to watch so that you know where the things that you like come from.
I think that's a great way to put it, because whereas like with Fritz Lang and Metropolis, very few people know the movie or would enjoy watching it today. But it's had incredible influence on stories and settings in so many things being made now. Whereas this one, I think it has both. It has had that influence, but it also has had this enduring reputation and interest from people. So the fact that it's still here today and we're still talking about it today, I think means that it has in fact deserved its reputation. It's not just kind of like one of those that it was important at the time, other people built on it, and now we've moved on, or we wouldn't still be talking about it today. So I think that it has deserved it undoubtedly.
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this one. I think it's incredibly important. I didn't love it. I wouldn't recommend it to folks. So I think it goes back to like, Windows was an incredibly important thing in the history of computers, but I wouldn't recommend anybody goes back and uses the original version of Windows. So I think it's a little bit of that for me, where it's like, it was really important, really like, huge turning point in the way people viewed stuff or did stuff. But
yeah, but you don't
long
need to,
grown for me.
You don't need to spend a couple of hours like having your blood pressure rise by trying to use Windows 95, whereas you can watch this and be like, cool, 90 minutes done, and now I get where all of those characters from Mortal Kombat come from.
Sure, and I think it really goes back to like, I'm happy to have seen it again. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, where I think I appreciate it more for what it did than what it is. And I get how, through 50 years now of evolution of martial arts and action movies, we've come to a very different place. This is just wasn't my jam to begin with. It was an all right movie. It was really cool to see Bruce Lee. And I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is like, it would have been really cool to see what came next. And that's, I think, the really kind of unfortunate part about all this is, Bruce Lee, this rising star who is incredibly charismatic and just magnetic on screen, didn't get a chance to kind of do more and like have another 30 years or whatever of making, cool kick-ass movies and kind of evolving what he did and the style of the movie. And I mean, imagine what this guy could have done on, a budget comparable to what they were doing in Hollywood, right? Like, it would have been really, really cool to see. And I think that's probably a good place to call it. So that's what we thought about Enter the Dragon. And we'd love to know what you thought about this movie or any other movie that we've watched. You can always find us on Twitter at How Did You Miss This? That's HDYMT_pod. And while you're there, take a look at some of the movies that we're planning on watching soon. Send us any questions or thoughts that you might have about them that you'd like us to cover. And if you enjoy what we're doing here, do us a favor. Take a second to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you happen to be listening. And we will be back with you next week when we're going to be watching The Fast and the Furious, the movie that launched a mega franchise. And we're going to see if this movie is still first over the line or whether it should have stayed missed. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you then. Whoop-cha!